November 14, 1940. RAF Fighter Command receives a transmission that makes the blood drain from every face in the room. 500 German bombers are forming over occupied France. They're not scattered. They're not probing. They're assembling in precise formation, which means only one thing. Tonight isn't a random raid. Tonight is an execution. Somewhere in Britain, a city is about to die. The officers stare at the plotting board as coordinates update in real time. They can see the bombers massing. British radar, the technology that saved them during the Battle of Britain just months ago, is working perfectly. They know the Germans are coming. They know approximately when. But knowing isn't enough, because these bombers aren't navigating by starlight or landmarks like pilots did in the last war. They're being guided by something invisible, something impossibly precise. Radio beams that slice through clouds, pierce through fog, ignore every obstacle that should make night bombing a fool's errand. The Germans call this guidance system Knickebein, the crooked leg. Hitler has personally promised his generals that tonight's raid will prove it unbeatable. But in a cramped office at the Air Ministry, a young physicist is hunched over radio frequency data that his superiors told him to ignore. Dr. R.V. Jones is 28 years old. He has no military rank that matters. Senior officers call his theories about German radio navigation fantasy and a waste of resources. One Air Marshal suggested he be reassigned to something useful. Yet Jones keeps staring at the numbers, because he sees something in those frequencies, a pattern everyone else missed, and if he's right, if his crazy theory is correct, he can expose Germany's entire bombing strategy. He just needs someone to listen. He has less than 6 hours until those bombers reach British soil. To understand how one ignored scientist saved London from destruction, we need to go back to when Britain stood completely alone, and the sky belonged to Germany. Summer 1940. France has fallen. The British Expeditionary Force barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving behind tanks, artillery, and any illusion that this war would be quick. Hitler's Wehrmacht controls everything from Norway to the Spanish border. Britain is the last domino standing, and everyone, including most British generals, expects it to fall by Christmas. The Luftwaffe owns the sky. German bombers appear over British cities with terrifying regularity. First the airfields, then the ports, then the factories, and increasingly, the civilian neighborhoods. The Blitz has begun, and British cities burn night after night. London, Liverpool, Birmingham, Southampton. The fires light up the darkness for miles, and every morning brings fresh rubble, fresh casualties, fresh grief. But something bothers the intelligence officers who survive long enough to analyze patterns. The bombing is too accurate. This isn't the scattershot destruction of the Great War, where pilots dropped bombs by hand and hoped for the best. German bombers are hitting specific buildings, specific intersections. They're threading payloads through cloud cover that should make precision impossible. One raid destroyed an aircraft engine factory while leaving the residential street 50 yards away untouched. Another hit a munitions depot hidden in a forest, a target that wasn't visible from the air even in daylight. How? The question haunts RAF intelligence. German pilots can't see through clouds. They can't navigate by landmarks when landmarks are invisible. Yet their bombs fall exactly where they intend. Night after night, city after city. Something is guiding them, something Britain cannot detect. And unless they find it, unless they understand it and defeat it, the war is already lost. The answer lies in a technology so simple it borders on elegant, and so devastating it changed warfare forever. Knickebein works on a principle any radio enthusiast could understand. Imagine 2 radio transmitters positioned along the French coast, separated by dozens of miles. Each transmitter broadcasts a narrow beam of radio waves aimed across the English Channel toward Britain. These beams are slightly different from each other. One transmits a series of dots in Morse code, the other transmits dashes. A German bomber pilot tunes his radio receiver to the Knickebein frequency and listens. If he hears only dots, he's drifted too far left. Only dashes means too far right. But when he's exactly on course, flying directly along the beam's center, the dots and dashes merge into a continuous tone, a steady hum that tells him he's perfectly aligned with his target. The pilot doesn't need to see anything, doesn't need landmarks or stars or even a functioning compass. He just follows the sound. The second beam intersects the first directly over the target. When the pilot's receiver picks up that intersection, a specific change in the audio signal, he knows he's arrived. He releases his bombs, in total darkness, through impenetrable cloud cover, and hits his target within 100 yards. German engineers had been perfecting the system since 1938. They'd solved problems that British scientists insisted were unsolvable. Radio waves travel in straight lines, but the Earth's surface curves. In theory, a beam transmitted from France shouldn't reach deep into Britain. It should shoot off into space as the planet curves away beneath it. The Germans discovered that under certain atmospheric conditions, radio waves bend slightly. They refract along the Earth's curvature. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to guide a bomber from Calais to Coventry with almost surgical precision. Hitler was so confident in Meaconing that he reportedly told his air marshals the system was undetectable and unstoppable. The British had radar, yes. They could see the bombers coming, but radar detected aircraft, not radio beams. The guidance system itself was invisible. The Luftwaffe could strike any target in Britain with accuracy that defenders couldn't counter because they couldn't even perceive the threat. At least, that's what the Germans believed. Reginald Victor Jones never intended to become a spy. He wanted to be a physicist, a proper academic physicist who studied infrared radiation and published papers that other physicists would cite. He'd earned his doctorate at Oxford at 24, younger than most of his peers, and his professors assumed he'd disappear into some university laboratory for a quiet career of research and teaching. Then the war came, and someone in British intelligence realized they had a problem. The military understood guns and ships and tactics. They did not understand science. And this new war, this mechanized, technological nightmare unfolding across Europe, ran on science, radar, radio, encryption, weapon systems that generals couldn't comprehend, let alone counter. Britain needed people who could think like scientists but act like intelligence officers. People who could look at fragments of technical data and see the weapon being built. They found Jones. Or rather, Jones found them. He'd written a paper during his doctoral work about using infrared detection to spot aircraft at night. Someone in the Air Ministry read it and thought, "This young man thinks about military problems the way we need people to think about military problems." They recruited him in 1939, gave him a tiny office, a meaningless title, and almost no resources. He was told to analyze whatever technical intelligence crossed his desk and report anything interesting. What crossed his desk was mostly garbage. Rumor, speculation, wild theories from pilots who'd seen strange lights or heard odd sounds. But Jones didn't dismiss anything outright. He filed, he categorized, he cross-referenced. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge from the noise. Multiple sources, unconnected, reporting at different times, mentioned radio beams. A captured German airman let slip something about following the signal. A resistance contact in occupied Holland reported unusual radio transmitter construction near the coast. A technical analysis of a crashed German bomber found radio equipment tuned to frequencies that didn't match any known German broadcast. Jones assembled these fragments into a theory. The Germans, he believed, had developed a radio-based navigation system that guided bombers to their targets with unprecedented accuracy. The theory explained everything: the impossible precision of night raids, the seemingly random frequencies detected near crashed aircraft, the transmitter construction in occupied territory. He presented his findings to his superiors. They laughed at him. Radio beams couldn't curve with the Earth, they said. Every physicist knew that. The distances involved were too great. The technology didn't exist. Jones was a young man with an active imagination, and he was wasting everyone's time with science fiction. One senior officer suggested, not unkindly, that perhaps Jones should focus on something more productive, something grounded in reality. Jones returned to his tiny office. He didn't abandon his theory. He couldn't. The evidence kept accumulating, fragment by fragment, source by source. He was right. He knew he was right. But being right means nothing if no one listens. Then the Oslo report arrived. In November 1939, a full year before the Coventry crisis, a package appeared at the British Embassy in Oslo, Norway. No return address, No identifying marks. Inside was a handwritten document, 7 pages long, from an anonymous German scientist. The document was extraordinary. It described in precise technical detail weapons programs that German intelligence had kept completely secret, radar developments, torpedo guidance systems, rocket research, and buried in paragraph 4 of page 3, almost as an afterthought, radio beam guidance for bomber navigation. British intelligence didn't know what to make of the Oslo report. Most analysts assumed it was disinformation, a German trick designed to send British researchers chasing phantoms. The details were too comprehensive, too accurate, too conveniently delivered. It had to be a trap. Jones disagreed. He read the Oslo report with the eyes of a physicist, not a spy. The technical specifications were consistent. The science was sound. Whoever wrote this document understood German engineering at an expert level and was taking an enormous personal risk to share it. This wasn't disinformation. This was a warning. He filed the Oslo report with his other evidence. The fragments were coalescing into something solid. Meaconing was real. The radio beams were real. And the Oslo report mentioned something else, something Jones underlined twice and stored in his memory. A second guidance system, more advanced than Meaconing, used only by elite bomber squadrons for the most critical targets. He'd need that detail later, much sooner than he expected. November 14th, 1940. The intelligence intercept arrives at 3 p.m. German radio traffic analysis, suggests a massive bombing operation scheduled for tonight. Target, unknown. But the scale is unprecedented. Every available bomber in Luftwaffe 3 is being mobilized. This isn't a raid. This is annihilation. Jones reads the intercept in his cramped office and feels his pulse quicken. 500 bombers. Guided by radio beams he's been tracking for months, heading toward a British city that doesn't know it's been selected for destruction. He spent a year gathering evidence, a year being ignored, a year watching bombs fall with impossible accuracy while his superiors insisted the guidance system didn't exist. No more. Tonight he proves it, or tonight he fails, and a city burns, and nothing he's discovered will matter. He needs equipment. Specifically, he needs a modified radio receiver capable of detecting transmissions in the frequency range he's identified from crashed bomber components. The military has this equipment. They've refused to allocate it to his fantasy project 3 times. But Jones knows an RAF signals officer who owes him a favor, a man who's read Jones's reports and quietly believes he might be onto something. Jones makes the call, explains the situation. The signals officer hesitates. Lending equipment without authorization could end his career. But Jones presses. "Give me 1 night," he says. "If I'm wrong, report me yourself. Court-martial me. I'll take full responsibility. But if I'm right, if those beams exist, we can save that city." Silence on the line. Then, "I'll have a truck waiting at 6. At 6 p.m., as darkness falls over southern England, Jones climbs into a modified signals truck equipped with radio detection gear. The driver is a young corporal who doesn't ask questions. They head toward the coast, toward the point where Jones calculates any guidance beam from France would first reach British soil. The bombers are forming over France. In approximately 6 hours, they'll cross the channel. Jones has until then to find an invisible beam that 3 senior RAF officers have sworn doesn't exist. The truck bounces along blacked-out roads. Jones huddles over the radio equipment, scanning frequencies. Static, noise, the empty hiss of an electromagnetic spectrum that seems determined to prove his superiors right. Hours pass. His hands grow cold. His confidence wavers. What if they're right? What if the patterns he's seen are coincidence? What if he's wasted a year chasing a theory that exists only in his imagination? The corporal glances back nervously. "Sir, finding anything?" Jones doesn't answer. He adjusts the frequency dial, moves it slowly across the range. 30 megahertz, 31, 31.5. And then he hears it. Not static, not noise. A tone. Steady, structured, directional. A continuous hum at exactly 31.5 megahertz, coming from the southeast, from France. Jones's hands are shaking as he triangulates. The beam is real. It's pointing northwest, directly into the heart of England. Directly toward, he checks his maps, directly toward Coventry. Turn around, he tells the corporal. Get me back to London, now. The bombers are already in the air. Jones has found the beam. But finding it isn't enough. He needs to reach someone with the authority to act, someone who will finally listen. He has 3 hours, maybe less, and the future of a city depends on whether anyone believes the crazy young physicist who's been right all along. The truck races through blacked-out English countryside. No headlights, no street lamps, just the pale glow of a quarter moon and a driver who knows these roads by memory. Jones sits in the back, clutching his notes, running calculations in his head. The beam is real. He's found it. But the bombers are already airborne, and Coventry doesn't know what's coming. The roads are empty. Petrol rationing and air raid protocols have cleared most civilian traffic, but the journey still takes nearly 2 hours. 2 hours of darkness and silence, and Jones rehearsing what he'll say when he reaches London. How do you convince generals who've dismissed you for a year that everything they believed was wrong? How do you explain radiophysics to men who think in terms of battalions and artillery? He arrives at the Air Ministry shortly after 10 p.m. The building is chaos. Officers rush through corridors with maps and reports. Telephones ring constantly. Everyone knows the raid is coming. No one knows where it will hit. Jones pushes through the crowd, looking for anyone with authority, anyone who might listen. He finds Wing Commander Charles Frank, one of the few senior officers who's taken his research seriously. Frank looks exhausted. He's been coordinating radar tracking of the incoming bomber formation for hours, but he stops when he sees Jones's face. You found something. The beam. Jones is breathless, words tumbling out. It's real. 31.5 megahertz, broadcasting from somewhere near Cherbourg. I tracked it for 40 minutes. It's pointing directly at Coventry. Frank stares at him. You're certain? I heard it myself. Steady tone, consistent signal strength, exactly the characteristics I predicted. This is how they're doing it. This is why their bombing is so accurate. And right now, that beam is painting a target on Coventry's Cathedral District. Frank is silent for a long moment. Around them, the chaos continues. Officers shouting, papers shuffling, the distant wail of air raid sirens beginning somewhere in the city. Then he makes a decision. Come with me. There's someone you need to talk to. The cabinet war rooms sit beneath the streets of Westminster, a maze of concrete bunkers where Britain's war leadership operates beyond the reach of German bombs. Jones has never been inside. Junior scientific advisors don't get invited to the nerve center of the British government. But tonight, Frank leads him through security checkpoints and down cramped staircases into the underground complex. The main conference room is smaller than Jones expected. A large table dominates the space, surrounded by chairs occupied by men whose faces he recognizes from newspapers. Military chiefs, cabinet ministers, and at the head of the table, cigar smoke curling around his unmistakable silhouette, Winston Churchill. The Prime Minister is in the middle of a briefing about the incoming raid. Radar has tracked over 400 bombers crossing the channel. They're maintaining tight formation, heading northwest. Impact expected within 2 hours. But the target remains uncertain. The formation could split, could feint, could be heading for any of a dozen industrial cities. Frank clears his throat. Prime Minister, this is Dr. R.V. Jones. Scientific intelligence. He has information about the raid. Churchill's eyes fix on Jones. They're sharp, evaluating, tired, but absolutely present. Scientific intelligence. You're the young man who's been writing reports about German radio beams. Yes, sir. Reports that several of my air marshals have called fanciful speculation. Jones feels his throat tighten. Yes, sir. They were wrong. A murmur ripples through the room. Junior staff don't contradict air marshals in front of the Prime Minister, but Churchill's expression doesn't change. If anything, there's a flicker of interest. Explain. Jones steps forward. His voice is steady now, the scientist taking over from the nervous young man. He describes Meaconing, the intersecting beams, the elegant simplicity of the guidance system. He explains how the Germans solved the curvature problem, how atmospheric refraction extends the beam's range far beyond theoretical limits. He describes the evidence he's gathered over months, the crashed bomber components, the prisoner interrogations, the Oslo report. And then he tells them what he heard tonight. The steady tone at 31.5 megahertz, the beam pointing directly at Coventry. The target is Coventry, Jones concludes. I'm certain of it. The Germans are guiding their bombers with radio signals we can detect, which means we can disrupt them. Silence. The room processes what they've just heard. Then one of the Air Marshals, a man who'd personally rejected Jones's request for equipment, speaks up. With respect, Prime Minister, this is the same theory Dr. Jones has been promoting for months. The physics are questionable at best. We cannot redirect defensive resources based on... The physics are sound. Jones interrupts him. He knows he's crossing a line, but he doesn't care. Not tonight. I've tracked the beam myself. It exists. It's real. And in approximately 90 minutes, it's going to guide 500 bombers directly to Coventry's city center. Churchill holds up a hand, silencing the room. His eyes haven't left Jones. Dr. Jones, if these beams exist, can we stop them? We can interfere with them, sir. Transmit counter signals on the same frequency. Create false beams that confuse their navigators. Make them think they're on course when they're actually drifting off target. It won't stop the raid, but it could reduce accuracy significantly, make them drop bombs on empty fields instead of factories. How quickly can this be implemented? Jones hesitates. Not tonight, sir. We'd need transmitting equipment positioned along the beam path. Engineers to calibrate the counter signals. Time we don't have. Churchill nods slowly. He looks around the table at his military chiefs, his cabinet ministers, the men who've been dismissing Jones's theories for a year. Gentlemen, it appears our young physicist has been right all along, and we have been dangerously wrong. He turns back to Jones. Dr. Jones, you have my full authority. Whatever resources you need, whatever equipment, whatever personnel, find me these beams, and then bend them. Coventry burns that night. The German bombers, guided by Meaconing beams that no one could disrupt in time, devastate the city center. The medieval cathedral, standing for 500 years, is reduced to a hollow shell. Over 500 civilians die. Thousands more are wounded or homeless. The term Coventrated enters the German vocabulary, a verb meaning to utterly destroy. Jones watches the reports come in from his office, sick with frustration. He was right. He proved he was right. And it didn't matter. The warning came too late, the countermeasures didn't exist yet, and people died because no one listened until the bombs were already falling. But Churchill listened, and now everything changes. Within 48 hours, Jones has resources he couldn't have imagined a week ago. Engineers, equipment, funding. A dedicated team of scientists and technicians who report directly to him. Their mission: understand the German beam system completely and develop countermeasures to defeat it. They call the operation Headache. The name is Churchill's idea, a small joke about giving the Germans something to worry about. The concept is elegant in its simplicity. Meaconing beams operate on specific frequencies. If British transmitters broadcast interfering signals on those same frequencies, German navigators will hear corrupted audio. The steady tone that tells them they're on course will dissolve into static and confusion. Their dots and dashes will blend unpredictably. They'll drift off course without realizing it, trusting instruments that are lying to them. The first jamming stations go operational within 2 weeks. They're crude, hastily modified radio transmitters positioned along the southern coast, but they work. During the next major German raid, bomber accuracy drops measurably. Payloads that should have hit industrial targets land in residential areas or open countryside. Still devastating, still deadly, but dispersed, diluted. The precision that made Meaconing terrifying is degrading. Jones monitors the results obsessively. Every raid is data. Every bomb pattern tells him something about German navigation and British countermeasures. He refines the jamming signals, adjusts frequencies, repositions transmitters. The system improves week by week, but he knows this isn't enough. The Germans will adapt. They'll change frequencies, modify their equipment, develop new systems. Meaconing is just the beginning. To truly defeat the beams, Jones needs to understand everything the Germans are planning. He needs to see the future of their technology before they deploy it. He pulls out the Oslo report, reads it again for the 100th time. Page 3, paragraph 4. The anonymous German scientist mentioned a second guidance system, more advanced than Meaconing, used only by elite squadrons, X-Gerät, the X-apparatus. Jones begins hunting. The X-Gerät system is Meaconing's sophisticated older brother. Where Meaconing uses two simple beams, X-Gerät employs multiple intersecting signals with complex timing relationships. The navigator doesn't just follow a tone. He tracks a sequence of audio cues that tell him exactly how far he's traveled along the beam path. When specific cues align, he's over the target. The system is so precise that it can guide bombs to within 30 yards of their intended impact point. Only one German squadron uses X-Gerät, Kampfgruppe 100, an elite pathfinder unit that flies ahead of main bomber formations. Their job is to mark targets with incendiary bombs, creating fires that guide the following waves. If KG-100 hits accurately, the entire raid hits accurately. If KG-100 misses, the raid scatters. Jones realizes that defeating X-Gerät is more important than jamming Meaconing. Meaconing guides the masses, X-Gerät guides the leaders, blind the pathfinders, and the whole formation loses its way. But X-Gerät is harder to jam. The multiple beams, the complex timing, the audio sequences. Simple interference doesn't work. The German navigators can filter out noise and still extract their guidance signals. Jones needs a more sophisticated approach. He assembles a team of the best radio engineers in Britain. They work 18-hour days, analyzing captured X-Gerät components, reverse engineering the signal processing, designing countermeasures that can fool a system designed to resist fooling. The work is painstaking. Every failed experiment means another raid where KG-100 guides bombers to their targets with devastating accuracy. Weeks pass, months. Jones barely sleeps. He lives on tea and cigarettes and the stubborn conviction that every problem has a solution. His team jokes that he's becoming more machine than man, processing data, running calculations, always analyzing, never resting. He doesn't laugh. There isn't time for laughter. Every night he doesn't solve X-Gerät is a night British cities burn. Then, in early February 1941, they crack it. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected direction. One of Jones's engineers notices that X-Gerát's timing signals have a subtle vulnerability. The system assumes its beams are reaching the aircraft without interference. If you can delay one beam slightly, retransmit it a fraction of a second late, the navigator's timing calculations become corrupted. He thinks he's at one position when he's actually at another. His bombs fall early or late, missing targets by hundreds of yards. They call the countermeasure bromide. It requires precise coordination. British transmitters must detect incoming X-Gerät signals and rebroadcast them with carefully calculated delays. But it works in testing. Now Jones needs to prove it works in combat. February 19, 1941. Jones sits in the operations room at RAF Fighter Command, watching the plotting board. Intelligence indicates a major German raid tonight. Beam monitoring stations have detected X-Gerät transmissions pointing toward Birmingham. KG-100 will lead, hundreds of bombers will follow. But tonight is different. Tonight, bromide stations are operational along the beam path. Tonight, British fighters have been positioned based on Jones's prediction of the German approach route. For the first time since the war began, the defenders know exactly where the attackers will appear. The bombers come. Radar tracks them crossing the channel right on schedule. Jones watches the plots advance across the board. His hands are clenched so tight his knuckles ache. The first reports come from Fighter Command. RAF Hurricanes, vectored to intercept coordinates Jones calculated from beam analysis, have made contact with the German formation. In the darkness over the Midlands, British fighters are engaging bombers that didn't expect to be found. Planes are falling from the sky. More reports. The Pathfinders, KG-100, are having navigation problems. Their incendiaries are landing scattered across the countryside instead of concentrated on target. Without accurate Pathfinder marking, the main bomber force is dispersing, dropping payloads haphazardly. Some hit Birmingham, many hit nothing at all. By morning, the results are clear. British fighters achieved their most successful night interceptions of the war. German bombing accuracy dropped by nearly 60% compared to similar raids. The Pathfinder system, the precision guidance that made the Luftwaffe so deadly, has been compromised. Jones allows himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The beams are no longer invisible. The guidance systems are no longer unbeatable. A year of being called crazy, of being dismissed and ignored, has led to this. British fighters waiting at exact coordinates for German bombers that thought they were invisible. But he doesn't celebrate for long. The Germans will notice their systems failing. They'll investigate. They'll adapt. This is a battle of minds, and it's only beginning. He returns to his office, pulls out his notebooks, and starts planning for what comes next. Somewhere in Germany, engineers are already working on countermeasures to his countermeasures. The race continues. On his desk sits the Oslo report, dog-eared and coffee-stained. He's never discovered who wrote it. That anonymous German scientist, whoever he was, took an enormous risk to warn Britain about weapons that didn't yet exist. Jones hopes he survived. He hopes the man knows his warning mattered. He glances at the report one more time, then files it away. There will be other battles, other systems, other invisible threats to detect and defeat. The war is far from over. But for the first time since November, Jones believes Britain might actually win it. The morning after the Birmingham raid, something unusual happens at Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin. A report lands on the desk of General Hans Jeschonnek, chief of the German Air Staff. The numbers don't make sense. KG-100, the elite Pathfinder squadron, flew their mission exactly as planned. Their navigators followed X-Gerät signals perfectly. Instruments showed them directly over the target when they released their incendiaries. Yet reconnaissance photographs from the following morning reveal their bombs fell scattered across farmland 3 miles east of Birmingham's industrial district. The main bomber force, following Pathfinder markers that weren't where they should have been, dropped hundreds of tons of explosives on sheep pastures and empty fields. Jeschonnek demands an explanation. The X-Gerät engineers insist their equipment functioned flawlessly. The navigators swear they followed procedure. Everyone did everything right, and somehow everything went wrong. The Germans begin investigating. They suspect equipment malfunction, perhaps atmospheric interference, maybe British jamming, though their experts insist X-Gerät is too sophisticated to jam effectively. They run tests, check calibrations, analyze every component of the guidance system. They find nothing wrong. What they don't realize, what they won't fully understand until after the war, is that a 28-year-old British physicist has gotten inside their heads. Jones isn't just disrupting their beams, he's disrupting their confidence. Every mission that fails despite perfect procedure plants seeds of doubt. Every payload that misses despite flawless navigation makes German aircrew wonder if they can trust their instruments. The invisible war isn't just about radio frequencies. It's about psychology. And Jones is winning. Spring 1941. The beam war enters a new phase. British countermeasures have grown sophisticated. Headache stations jam nicobine across southern England. Bromide installations corrupt X-Gerät timing signals. But Jones's most elegant weapon is something called Meaconing. The concept is beautifully simple. Instead of jamming German beams, which creates obvious interference that navigators might notice, Meaconing stations receive the guidance signals and rebroadcast them from different locations. The German navigator hears exactly what he expects to hear. His instruments show him on course. Everything seems normal, but the signals he's following aren't coming from France anymore. They're coming from British transmitters positioned to lead him astray. Entire bomber formations follow false beams across the English countryside, convinced they're approaching industrial targets. They drop their payloads with precision and confidence. And in the morning, reconnaissance reveals they've demolished nothing but farmland. Craters dot empty fields. Incendiaries have burned hedgerows. Occasionally, a confused farmer reports explosions in his pasture, wondering what the Germans could possibly have been aiming at. The psychological effect compounds with each failed mission. German aircrew begin reporting strange phenomena, instruments that contradict each other, beams that seem to shift mid-flight, signals that disappear and reappear unpredictably. Some pilots describe ghosts in the radio, voices and tones that shouldn't exist, interference that seems almost intelligent. They don't know they're fighting a battle against British scientists. They think their technology is haunted. Interrogation reports from captured German airmen reveal growing paranoia. Navigators no longer trust their equipment completely. Pilots second-guess bombing coordinates. The mechanical confidence that made the Luftwaffe so effective is eroding mission by mission. Some crews begin relying on visual navigation whenever possible, preferring the uncertainty of landmarks to the treachery of radio signals. Jones reads these interrogation transcripts with grim satisfaction. The beams haven't disappeared. German transmitters still broadcast across the channel every night. But the trust is gone. When a navigator can't be certain whether his instruments are telling the truth, precision bombing becomes impossible. Jones has done something more profound than jamming signals. He's poisoned the relationship between German aircrew and their own technology. The Beam War's lessons ripple outward through the rest of the conflict. When British planners developed deception operations for D-Day, they draw directly on Jones's methods. Operation Fortitude, the elaborate scheme to convince Germany that the Allied invasion would target Calais instead of Normandy, uses many of the same principles: false signals, misdirection, exploiting the enemy's trust in their own intelligence systems. The ghost army that kept German divisions waiting at the wrong beaches owes its conceptual DNA to the ghost beams that led German bombers to empty fields. British anti-submarine warfare transforms using techniques Jones pioneered. The same signals intelligence that cracked German beam systems helps decode U-boat communications and track their movements across the Atlantic. The same analytical mindset, fragments assembled into patterns revealing strategies, guides the campaign that eventually breaks the submarine threat. Even the development of Allied strategic bombing incorporates lessons from the Beam War. Understanding how Germany built precision guidance systems helps British and American planners develop their own. The electronic warfare capabilities that Jones's team created defensively become offensive weapons, jamming German radar, confusing their air defenses, clearing paths for bomber formations. By war's end, electronic warfare has become a permanent feature of military strategy. The invisible spectrum, radio frequencies, radar bands, electronic signals, is now recognized as territory to be contested and controlled, as strategically important as physical terrain. Every major military power builds institutions dedicated to signals intelligence and electronic countermeasures. The discipline Jones essentially invented in his cramped Air Ministry office becomes a cornerstone of modern defense. Dr. R.V. Jones survives the war. Many of his colleagues don't, burned out by stress, killed in raids, broken by the relentless pressure of secret work that couldn't be acknowledged or shared. Jones carries his own scars, though he rarely speaks of them. The years of minimal sleep and maximum stress leave lasting marks. After the war, he returns to academic life, becoming professor of natural philosophy at the University of Aberdeen. He teaches, he researches. He tries to rebuild a normal existence after years of extraordinary circumstances. But the war never fully releases him. Government requests keep coming. Cold War intelligence challenges require his analytical gifts. He advises on Soviet technical capabilities, helps develop British radar systems, consults on projects he can never discuss publicly. The young physicist who wanted a quiet academic career becomes one of Britain's most valued secret advisors, a bridge between scientific understanding and national security. In 1978, he finally tells his story. His book, Most Secret War, reveals for the first time the full scope of the Beam War and Britain's electronic intelligence operations. The book becomes a classic, still required reading for intelligence professionals decades later. Jones writes with clarity and understatement, more interested in explaining how problems were solved than in claiming personal credit. When interviewers ask what drove him, how he maintained conviction when everyone dismissed him, how he found the strength to keep working when the pressure seemed unbearable, his answers are characteristically modest. "I simply refused to believe we couldn't outsmart them," he says in one interview. "The Germans were clever, very clever, but they weren't gods. Their systems had weaknesses. Every system has weaknesses. You just have to find them." He dies in 1997, aged 86. By then, the technologies he pioneered have evolved beyond recognition. Stealth aircraft absorb radar signals using principles that echo his countermeasure work. GPS satellites guide precision munitions with accuracy the Nicobine engineers could never have imagined. Electronic warfare has become so sophisticated that modern militaries spend billions on systems to attack and defend the invisible spectrum. All of it traces back in some form to a 28-year-old physicist who heard a steady tone at 31.5 megahertz on a dark November night in 1940. Think about what could have happened. What would have happened if Jones had given up? If the dismissals and rejections had broken his conviction? If he'd accepted the expert consensus that German radio beams were fantasy? November 14, 1940, plays out differently. 500 bombers approach Coventry, guided by invisible beams that no one is looking for. They devastate the city, just as they did in our timeline. But there's no Jones in the cabinet war room explaining what he's found. No Churchill ordering countermeasures. No headache or bromide or Meaconing. The next raid hits Birmingham with full precision. Then Manchester. Then Liverpool. Every industrial city in Britain falls under surgical bombardment. Factories that produce Spitfires and tanks and ammunition are systematically eliminated. The production capacity that allows Britain to fight is steadily destroyed. Maybe Britain still survives. The Channel is a formidable barrier, and German invasion forces faced enormous logistical challenges. But the margin between survival and defeat narrows. The American aid that eventually turns the tide arrives to a nation more battered, more depleted, less capable of fighting back. The war lasts longer. More people die. History pivots on the persistence of one young scientist who refused to stop believing he was right. That's the lesson buried in this story. Not that science wins wars, though it often does. Not that technology matters, though it always has. The lesson is simpler and harder. Sometimes the person who sees what everyone else misses is the only person who can save what everyone else takes for granted. Jones wasn't special because he was smarter than his colleagues. The senior officers who dismissed him weren't stupid. They were experienced professionals applying reasonable skepticism to extraordinary claims. Their mistake wasn't intellectual, it was imaginative. They couldn't conceive of a technology that contradicted their assumptions about what was possible. Jones could, and that imaginative leap, backed by stubborn conviction and relentless work, changed everything. The outsiders who refused to quit. The voices dismissed as crazy until events proved them right. History is shaped by these people more often than we admit. We build statues for generals and politicians. We should build more for the analysts and scientists and engineers who see threats no one else perceives and fight battles no one else understands. Dr. R.V. Jones saw invisible beams, and because he refused to stop looking, Britain survived to see victory. If you want to see how another underdog inventor changed the course of battle, a sergeant with no engineering degree who saved D-Day with scrap metal and a blowtorch, subscribe and hit the bell. That story drops next week. A broken tank, a crazy idea, 48 hours to build something that Eisenhower called the most important invention of the war. Trust me, it's even crazier than this one. Crazier than